a Mafia boss, stormed onto the Cotton Club stage and punched Cab Calloway right in front of hundreds of spectators. That punch didn't just send Cab crashing to the floor, it silenced all of Harlem. Then Bumpy Johnson appeared and did something that people still talk about to this day whenever Harlem's boundaries are mentioned. There are nights that have become legendary here, passed down from musicians in small speakeasies to beauty salon owners, from street corner shoeshine men to old folks sitting on stoops. Those stories don't need every detail to be perfectly accurate, because what matters more is the spirit they preserve, the spirit of power, respect, and what it meant to be a black artist in a city that constantly tested their pride. This is one of those stories. One night at the Cotton Club, when Cab Calloway was doing what he did best, making the whole room move to his voice and an unmatched stage presence, the audience was electric when it happened. According to eyewitnesses and those who only heard about it but swear they were there, Vincenzo "Vinny" Knuckles, Romano, drunk and full of resentment, climbed onto the stage and threw a punch that made every sound disappear. Just minutes later, the news reached Bumpy Johnson. He stood up immediately, and what happened next became one of the moments passed down through generations. The moment Harlem saw itself protected, even when the Italian Mafia thought they could do the opposite. Harlem in the late 1930s was a place where light and shadow coexisted, where black music captivated America, but racism still gripped every street corner. The Cotton Club, the era's most dazzling symbol, was where Cab Calloway owned the stage, where his voice, his horn sections, and his charisma made audiences leap to their feet in endless applause. Cab was an outstanding bandleader, a superb singer, a performer whose every gesture and every note made people feel they were witnessing something irreplaceable. But even though his name shone bright on the marquee, he wasn't allowed through the front door. The floor below was reserved exclusively for white patrons, and after making the whole city swoon, he had to leave through the service entrance. That wasn't just injustice, it was a cruel reminder that in that era, black talent was never enough for equal treatment. And it was against that backdrop that one man's name was always mentioned cautiously, yet with deep respect: Bumpy Johnson. He didn't stand in the spotlight, but in Harlem no one understood the unspoken rules, hidden power, and fragile boundaries between forces better than he did. Bumpy saw clearly one truth: if black artists were insulted, threatened, or attacked right in the places where they built Harlem's fame, the entire community would suffer. Cab Calloway wasn't just a famous performer. He was the face of black pride in an age when respect was always blocked by skin color. Bumpy understood that. He had watched Cab from the early days, seen how Cab gave Harlem a voice, seen black audiences swell with pride when one of their own captivated the entire country. Bumpy didn't need to love jazz to know that Cab was an asset to Harlem, and anyone who wanted to harm Cab was challenging the whole community that Bumpy had spent his life protecting. Their relationship didn't need many words. Cab knew that off-stage, there was someone watching from afar to ensure he wasn't disrespected by those wielding white power. And Bumpy understood that protecting Cab wasn't just about one man, it was about preserving Harlem's symbol, preserving the dignity of an entire community oppressed by prejudice and invisible power. It was in that context that a figure like Vincenzo "Vinny" Knuckles Romano from the Genovese family appeared, a name that could make many in Harlem stop talking instantly. He controlled nightlife through tangled networks, illegal gambling dens, after-hours bars, backstage VIP rooms, and the Cotton Club itself, where the glamorous exterior lights couldn't hide the real power operating inside. To Vinny, the order was clear: Black artists performed to entertain white patrons. Nothing more. Anyone with personality. Anyone who held their head too high. Anyone who showed an independent voice made him uneasy. Cab Calloway, with his confident demeanor and command of the stage, was the kind of person Vinny noticed right away. What pushed him from unease to action was a jive-talk quip Cab made during a previous show. It was just a passing remark, but the audience laughed, and Vinny took it as an insult. In his world, laughter wasn't something for people like Cab when it involved the Mafia. After that evening, Vinny sat in his private room behind the Cotton Club for 3 straight nights, drink in front of him, eyes fixed on the stage as if calculating something. With each passing night, his attitude grew heavier. People nearby heard him repeat the same thing. He needs to know his place. To Vinny, the matter had to end right on the stage, in the exact spot where Cab had irritated him. No message, no warning. Just one act sufficient to make everyone understand who really decided what could be said in the Cotton Club. He chose the moment when Cab was at his most spotlighted, when the room was fullest, when every eye was on the stage. In Vinny's mind, that was the perfect place to restore the order he believed everyone in Harlem had to follow. He didn't account for Cab's reaction. He didn't account for the audience's reaction. And above all, he didn't account for the fact that his action crossed a very clear line. Cab Calloway belonged to Harlem. And Harlem, no matter how divided, still had one man standing behind its artists. That night, the Cotton Club was packed. People crowded from the lobby all the way to the back rows, not a single seat empty. The smell of cigarettes, strong liquor, and perfume blended into the signature nighttime Harlem atmosphere. On stage, Cab Calloway was leading his band with his familiar confidence. He held his baton, leaned in, signaled the brass section, then shifted to his soaring voice that commanded absolute focus from the room. Minnie the Mosher rang out, the call and response between Cab and the audience building a powerful rhythm that filled every corner. Cab controlled the show with his voice and presence. Everything felt solid and full of life. No one thought the performance would veer in another direction. In the front rows, Vincenzo Vinny Knuckles Romano started to stand. He had been there since the beginning, glass beside him, eyes on the stage but not to enjoy it. The irritation inside him didn't lessen. It grew with every minute Cab performed. Vinny braced his hands on his chair, stepped into the aisle, not waiting for anyone to move. People nearby quietly shifted aside. No one wanted to get involved in his business. Cab continued performing, unaware of the shift. Vinny walked straight to the stairs leading to the stage, each step deliberate. When he reached the edge of the stage, the band stopped playing. Cab turned, saw Vinny approaching. Surprise flickered in Cab's eyes, but he kept his voice calm, asking what was wrong. Without waiting another second, Vinny started yelling. His voice was hoarse from drink but clear, each word spilling out with hostility. He called Cab names that anyone hearing would recognize as deeply insulting. He said Cab had humiliated him, that the joke from before couldn't be overlooked. Cab explained it was just show banter, not aimed at anyone. He reached out a hand, trying to ease the tension, but Vinny rejected any explanation, didn't want to understand Cab's intent. In his head there was only one thing. Cab needed to be put in his place in front of the entire Cotton Club. The room gradually fell silent. The atmosphere shifted noticeably. People at the front tables looked down, avoiding eye contact. Waiters stood frozen, trays still held high. Security along the walls didn't move forward. Everyone knew who they were facing, and one wrong step could cost a life. Cab kept trying to stay calm. He continued saying no one had been insulted, that it was all a misunderstanding, but as soon as the words left his mouth, Vinny barely listened. He said Cab thought that being on stage, cheered by the crowd, meant he didn't have to pay for what he'd said. His voice was low but loud enough for everyone in the Cotton Club to hear clearly. Cab started to speak again, but Vinny didn't give him the chance. He stepped forward, raised his fist. The punch was fast and heavy. No warning. Vinny's fist landed square in Cab's face. Cab crumpled to the stage floor. His baton slipped from his hand. He raised a hand to his cheek. Blood began seeping from his lip. The packed room stood absolutely still. A few people opened their mouths, but no sound came out. Others looked towards security, waiting for intervention, but they remained frozen. No one dared act. Vinny stood on stage, glaring down at Cab menacingly, as if waiting for Cab to try standing so he could continue. He said a few short words, enough for Cab and the entire room to understand he wasn't finished. Down in the audience, every eye was fixed upward, tension gripping like a vice. A black artist beaten in the best place. He shone brightest, right in front of people who should have protected him, or at least spoken up. But no one moved. The band members stood in place, no one lifting an instrument. Everyone in the Cotton Club understood that stepping into this confrontation meant putting themselves on the edge of danger. Cab tried to shift, bracing his hands. No one stepped forward to help. The entire Cotton Club was silent, quiet enough to hear someone shifting posture in the back. And in that moment of stillness, no one in the room knew that a retaliation had already begun forming outside the Cotton Club, where what had just happened would not be ignored. Cab Calloway, lying on the Cotton Club stage floor, wasn't just the image of an artist attacked. It was a slice exposing everything he had endured since entering music. Cab was born in Baltimore, raised in neighborhoods where blues and gospel wove into daily life. From childhood he could mimic voices, rhythms, and knew how to draw every nearby eye. As he grew older, Cab moved to Chicago, then Harlem, where he found the environment for his talent to flourish. The Harlem Renaissance put black culture on the front pages, but Cab put it on the national map. His bright high voice, graceful presence, precise stage control, all made him the artist every American audience had to name. The Cotton Club treated Cab as the soul of its grandest nights, but white applause didn't equal respect for Cab. He performed on the main stage, but entered and exited through the service door. He thrilled thousands, yet was denied a seat in his own showroom. Some nights, Cab electrified the club with brilliant improvisations, then returned to a cramped dressing room, dodging disdainful glances from a few white staff. That injustice became a familiar part of his life. Cab wasn't one to start trouble. He faced racism with the demeanor of an artist who knew his worth. He didn't shout back, didn't confront loudly. He let the music be his best response. But that composure didn't mean Cab didn't feel the era's weight. He knew every time he stepped on stage, he had to hold himself amid gazes that both admired and condescended. He understood that to survive and shine, he had to stand firm against both applause and racist whispers backstage. That's why Vinny Knuckles' punch tonight wasn't just a personal act. It was the manifestation of years of insult toward black artists. It was punishment that white power figures thought they could inflict on performers simply because of their skin color. When Cab fell, it wasn't just one man falling. It was the image of all Harlem being struck at the heart of its culture. Cab wasn't just the man on stage. He was the symbol of pride, of finesse, of overcoming barriers society erected. Harlem saw itself in Cab, talented, restricted, but refusing to vanish. So when Vinny's fist hit Cab, it didn't stop at flesh. It reached the community outside, the black workers inside the Cotton Club, the black audiences barred from entry, yet singing along on the sidewalk. Everyone who knew Cab was part of Harlem's soul. That night, the punch was no longer just between Vinny and Cab. It was a challenge to an entire community, a boundary shattered in front of hundreds, and therefore its consequences wouldn't end on the Cotton Club stage. And another truth: if Harlem had one person every underworld figure had to consider before acting, it was Bumpy Johnson. To outsiders, his name was whispered low. To the black community, he was the protective wall, the man standing between them and forces that wanted to crush Harlem. Bumpy didn't come from spotlights or politics. He came from the streets, from years observing every detail of how power worked in a city always trying to push black people down. People called him the uncrowned king of Harlem, but what earned respect wasn't wealth or violence. It was his ability to understand exactly the boundaries between Harlem and the Italian Mafia families, and make sure everyone stayed within them. Bumpy knew when to compromise, when to stand firm, and when silence alone made others understand. The Italian Mafia had interests in Harlem, but they knew Harlem wasn't ownerless territory. There were things they could control: gambling, liquor, smuggling, but things they weren't allowed to touch. Black artists were among them. Though the rule wasn't written down, it existed through one man's presence: Bumpy Johnson. The relationship between Cab Calloway and Bumpy wasn't loud. They didn't appear together, didn't need public handshakes. But Cab knew well that every time he stepped on stage, an invisible Harlem network protected him from hands that wanted to exploit or threaten. That network originated with Bumpy. Years earlier, when Cab was rising, some tried to set performance terms to extort money from emerging black artists. Once Cab was blocked after a show by strange young men, reminding him about contributions. Things hadn't escalated when Bumpy appeared. No shouting, no scene. He just stood there, looking each one over, and with that look alone, they left. Cab never forgot that moment. Not because he received special privilege, but because for the first time he saw someone outside his profession value him as essential to Harlem. From that day, a quiet respect existed between them. Cab knew who kept his nights safe on stage, and Bumpy knew what he was protecting. To Bumpy, Cab wasn't just an artist. Cab represented Harlem's finest part, something he believed no one could destroy. Cab made Harlem proud. Cab carried black voices beyond dark streets, onto newspapers, radio, into hearts of people who never thought they'd listen to a black artist. To Bumpy, that wasn't just music. It was the community's spiritual asset, something that, if insulted, he had a duty to answer. So when word came that Vinny Knuckles Romano, a man carrying Italian Mafia arrogance, had raised a fist to Cab right on the Cotton Club stage, it was no longer personal friction. To Bumpy, it was a direct declaration of war on Harlem. It didn't matter if Vinny was drunk or sober. It didn't matter if he thought Cab humiliated him. The only thing that mattered was a boundary crossed, a boundary no one had dared erase before. Bumpy always kept patience in negotiations with the Italian Mafia, but he was also always clear: black artists weren't decorations to lift or drop at whim. Cab certainly wasn't someone to be publicly humiliated in his own city, and that's why when the call from the Cotton Club reached him, Bumpy didn't ask for details, didn't need to know who started it. He only understood one thing: Cab Calloway had just been attacked, and Harlem couldn't let it stand. Bumpy stood not out of hot temper but duty, not to start war, but out of respect for the artist who made the entire community feel seen and heard. That night, before heading to the Cotton Club, Bumpy Johnson already knew one thing clearly. Anyone who punched Cab had punched Harlem itself, and to him, that was unacceptable. Cab was still struggling to rise when Vinnie Knuckles loomed above, his shadow blocking the stage lights. Cab tilted his head, blood ran down his lip and dripped onto the wooden floor. Vinnie leaned down, voice thick and challenging, barking, "Get up so I can hit you again." No one in the audience dared breathe loudly. Cab pressed his hands to the floor, trying to push up, but the punch had dazed him so much he could only lift his upper body. Vinnie shifted his foot forward, giving the impression he was ready for another blow if Cab moved. The musicians behind stayed frozen with their instruments. The entire Cotton Club was locked in tension. People stared at the stage without daring to meet each other's eyes. Silence fell, not because they didn't care about Cab, but because everyone knew stepping forward now could make them disappear in that very night. From the side hallway, a Cotton Club employee stood at the door, gripping the frame tightly to keep from shaking. He looked at Cab on the floor, at Vinnie Knuckles hovering above, then turned and ran straight through the kitchen, past the liquor storage, down the narrow path to the back exit. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the long-distance phone they used to call Lenox Avenue when trouble arose. The line picked up, and he spoke without pausing for breath. "Mr. Bumpy, Vinnie Knuckles just punched Cab, right on stage." A few seconds of silence followed, the kind that comes from someone weighing something serious. Then Bumpy's voice came through, low and firm. "I'm on my way, nothing more. No questions about who started it. No asking how badly Cab was hurt. No asking if Vinnie was drunk. Just one sentence, short and final." On Lenox Avenue, Bumpy rose from the table where he'd been sitting, set down his coffee cup, as if his evening had simply shifted direction rather than been torn apart by an incident. People in the place looked up as he walked out, but no one asked anything. They saw his eyes and knew this wasn't something to discuss. Back at the Cotton Club, meanwhile, the stage had become a place no one dared look directly at. Vinnie Knuckles still stood there, head slightly tilted, waiting for Cab to give him reason for another swing. He nudged the fallen baton with his foot, sliding it left. Cab drew a breath, trying to stay calm, trying to preserve dignity, even while lying at the feet of someone intent on humiliating him. The audience made no sound, as if hundreds of breaths had been sucked away. A white gentleman at a table near the stage started to stand, but his companion immediately pulled his sleeve down. A black waitress against the wall clenched her hands until her fingertips went white. The musicians clung to their instruments, but kept glancing at Vinnie, afraid he'd turn on them. A security guard on the right looked to his colleague on the left. Both drew deep breaths, but neither advanced. They knew they stood between two forces they couldn't intervene in. The silence thickened until it felt like it pressed down on the entire room. Cab looked at Vinnie. His eyes held no fear, only the weariness and sadness of someone accustomed to injustice, but never expecting it. This brazen in front of so many. Vinnie leaned down a bit, speaking low, each word heavy as stone. "Get up." Cab didn't answer. He knew standing would mean another beating. He also knew he couldn't stay down forever. But right now, any movement could signal Vinnie to strike. And then the Cotton Club sank back into silence. A long, cold, piercing silence louder than any music ever played there. No one in the room knew the floor had just trembled slightly, not from music, not from audience footsteps, but from someone preparing to enter and break that silence. Someone who, upon hearing Cab had been hit, said only 3 words, "I'm on my way." The Cotton Club doors swung open, not with a loud bang, but with an unusual hush that spread through the lobby. People near the entrance immediately turned, and upon recognizing who had entered, instinctively parted. Bumpy Johnson walked in through the front door as if it had been built for him. Without a word, without shouting, his presence alone changed the air. Hands in his coat pockets, calm stride, eyes scanning the packed room without hurry. From the main lobby to the aisles along the walls, anyone who saw him stepped back half a pace, not fearing he would attack, but knowing he had come to end something no one else dared touch. The path from door to stage cleared as if prepared in advance. The sound of Bumpy's shoes on the floor was just audible, yet each step made people grip chair arms tighter. Musicians looked down. Waiters held trays close to their chests. Seated patrons held their breath, as if their own sounds might shatter an invisible order. He walked straight toward the stage, eyes only stopping when they landed on Cab Calloway, lying on the floor, hand to his cheek, breathing heavy and labored. Vinnie Knuckles still stood over Cab, his expression changing upon realizing who was approaching. Bumpy climbed the stage steps, movement smooth like someone used to tense situations. He didn't look back at the audience, didn't check who was watching. He simply stood there, between Cab and Vinnie, body slightly forward, as if shielding Cab without saying back off. Vinnie frowned, lifted his chin, voice full of challenge. "This ain't your business." Bumpy looked at him for a moment, eyes showing neither anger nor fear. He spoke slowly, voice low but clear. "Everything in Harlem is my business." The words landed like an order, a signal that every boundary had just been redrawn. The entire Cotton Club was silent enough to hear someone's rapid breathing far back in the seats. Vinnie narrowed his eyes, stepped forward, but Bumpy remained still. No retreat, no hand movement, no threatening posture. That calm unsettled Vinnie. 30 seconds passed in heavy silence. When the tension became unbearable, Vinnie glanced down at his crew below. 4 men at a table near the stage watched him, but none moved. Bumpy didn't look at them, yet his mere presence kept them from reaching for weapons. One wrong move now, and not just the Cotton Club but all Harlem would erupt into major conflict. Vinnie understood that, but he also understood that backing down meant losing face across the city. Vinnie clenched his teeth, trying to suppress the confusion rising inside. "You think you can stand in my way," he said, voice quieter, lacking earlier confidence. Bumpy replied instantly, allowing no pause. "I ain't standing in your way. I'm standing right where I belong." Vinnie had no response. His eyes shifted from Bumpy to Cab, trying to sit up. Cab's gaze held no fear, only exhaustion mixed with pain from knowing Bumpy's arrival was for him. Under the stage lights, Vinnie's face flushed from liquor and the feeling of being cornered. He took half a step back, but immediately stopped, as if trying to preserve some remaining authority. "You know who I am?" he said, but his voice no longer held steady. Bumpy stepped closer, now directly in front of him, the 2 men less than half a meter apart. "I know who you are," Bumpy said, "but tonight you forgot where you're standing." Those words pulled the entire room back to clear order. Vinnie Knuckles could be loud in many places, but not here. Not in Harlem, not with Cab Calloway. Once more, Vinnie looked down at his crew, searching for an escape, but the table remained motionless. No one touched a gun, no one stood, no one wanted to face Bumpy. And when he realized he was completely alone on stage, his anger turned to humiliation. He turned away, hissing through clenched teeth. "This ain't over." Bumpy didn't budge. "It's over," he said, voice even and solid as a steel door. Vinnie stood still a second, as if searching for half his earlier aggression, but found nothing to hold on to. He stepped back down the stairs, footsteps heavy as stone. People in the audience moved aside to let him pass, eyes not meeting his, but all seeing the embarrassment following him to the door. When Vinny and his crew left the club, the Cotton Club remained utterly silent. Bumpy bent down to help Cab up, his hands so steady that one touch let Cab know the threat was gone. The stage held no music, no laughter, only the faint, trembling breaths of people who knew they had just witnessed something Harlem would retell for years. Not because of a brawl, not because of liquor or Vinnie Knuckles' name, but because that night, under the Cotton Club lights, one man walked in, stood between opposing sides, and shifted the entire atmosphere without drawing a gun or raising his voice. One man who only needed to step onto the stage to end everything. As soon as Vinny disappeared beyond the door, cold air from outside rushed in like a period at the end of a sentence. His crew hurried after him, none daring to glance back at the stage. The Cotton Club stayed dead quiet a few more seconds, as if the room was trying to process what had happened. Then, from a small corner in the back, applause started. One clap, then two, then more. In seconds, scattered sounds turned into a thick, powerful wave of applause rolling through the audience like surf. People who had been seated, stood. Those already standing leaned toward the stage. All eyes turned to the two men who had just faced danger. No one in the room dared approach. The band set down instruments to clap. Waiters placed trays on tables. Front row patrons rose fully. Not everyone in the room understood every detail, but everyone knew they had witnessed a moment the Cotton Club had never seen. Bumpy Johnson stood center stage, turning to Cab Calloway. The lights hit them both, making their image sharp as if etched into the air. Bumpy reached down to help Cab stand, movement gentle yet firm, like someone who had done this countless times for Harlem people treated unjustly. Cab took Bumpy's hand, slightly trembling. When he stood straight, Bumpy spoke low enough for those near the stage to hear. "Nobody touches you in Harlem, not a threat to anyone, not a power declaration, just a simple, direct affirmation from a man the whole city knew kept his word." Cab looked into Bumpy's eyes, and in that moment he was no longer the artist knocked down. He was a Harlem man, whose standing had just been restored. Cab's eyes reddened, corners slightly wet. He tried to steady his voice, but it still shook lightly. Thank you, sir." A short sentence carrying layers of meaning. Thank you for arriving at the right moment. Thank you for not leaving him on the floor, like discarded decoration. Thank you for making the entire Cotton Club witness one thing. Black artists do not stand alone. The applause grew louder, rising from middle rows, spreading to both wings, then rebounding off the ceiling. Some clapped out of admiration for Bumpy, some out of sympathy for Cab, others because they understood the boundary between Harlem and white power had just been reaffirmed clearer than ever. Some wiped tears, some looked around to confirm they weren't the only ones with tight throats. The Cotton Club, long a stage where black artists performed under white scrutiny, suddenly became the place where Harlem declared something vital. They would not let anyone humiliate one of their own. Cab gripped the baton a staff member had retrieved and brought on stage. He looked at Bumpy for a long time, as if wanting to say more, but not knowing where to start. Bumpy only nodded lightly, letting Cab know no more words were needed. They stood there a few seconds amid endless applause, under stage lights illuminating two very different men, united in defending something greater than themselves. When Bumpy stepped off the stage, the audience parted for him as if the path had been destined. Cab Calloway remained under the lights, pain still on his face but his presence restored, the presence of an artist who knew that after tonight he would no longer face injustice alone. And behind the erupting applause, Harlem seemed to speak one wordless sentence: "Cab is ours." And tonight we stood up for him. News of the incident spread across New York before the Cotton Club even closed. People in the back rows told those outside told the long line of parked cars out front. Within an hour, whispers raced down Lenox Avenue, through barbershops, cafes, corner stores, then reached Little Italy and back rooms of Italian restaurants where bosses still met. Vinnie Knuckles was forced out of the Cotton Club by Bumpy Johnson. He punched Cab Calloway. Bumpy walked onto the stage in front of everyone. Rumors, even distorted, kept one truth intact. Vinnie Knuckles had crossed the line, and in New York's criminal world, crossing the line always came with a price. That night, when Bumpy returned to Lenox Avenue, the phone in the small office behind his pharmacy rang. The security man handed it over without a word. The voice on the other end belonged to someone who never introduced himself, but Bumpy knew who it was. Who else but a high-ranking Genovese family capo would call at that hour? "I heard about the Cotton Club," the voice said, low, unhurried, no need to sound threatening. Vinnie Knuckles crossed the line. "We'll handle it." Bumpy didn't reply immediately. He knew statements like that weren't for acknowledgement or negotiation. They were announcements, and in this world, a capo's announcement meant everything was already decided. "Meet me tomorrow," the voice continued. "Little cafe on the corner of 118th Street. The call ended without goodbye. The next morning, Harlem's sky was hazy. Bumpy walked into the old cafe with foggy glass, scarred wooden tables, and the smell of espresso mixed with cheap soap-mopped floors. The place was empty. Only one Italian man sat in the corner, long gray coat, hat beside him. The capo looked at Bumpy as if they were meeting to discuss weather, not a punch that could ignite war between two powers. He nodded slightly. "Sit." Bumpy pulled out a chair, sat opposite. No one ordered coffee. The capo leaned his elbows on the table, spoke directly. "That night you were right, Bumpy." That seemingly simple statement carried the weight of a verdict. No one in the Italian Mafia easily admitted being wrong, especially not to a black man, but the previous night was too clear to justify. He continued, "Vinnie acted like an idiot, embarrassed us. You know we don't maintain that kind of reputation." Bumpy stayed silent. The capo looked down at the table, then added, "Cab Calloway is protected. Nobody touches him again." Not a promise. An order issued from higher than Vinnie Knuckles. In this world, such words held the force of contracts. But right after, the capo's tone shifted. "But don't challenge us again." He looked straight into Bumpy's eyes. "We gave you this one because Vinnie was wrong. Next time, no matter who's right, it'll be different." Bumpy placed both hands on the table, neither challenging nor yielding. "I don't look for trouble, but if anyone touches Harlem's people, I'll handle it." The capo narrowed his eyes as if expecting that answer. "You're Harlem," he said, "and our city. Each side has boundaries. Don't blur them." The air between them was heavy like years of kitchen smoke on the ceiling. Bumpy stood first, adjusted his coat, nodded lightly as a sign he'd heard enough. The capo stayed seated, only saying one last thing: "Vinnie will be called away somewhere else." Those in the life understood. Called away somewhere else wasn't a trip. It was the gentle way of saying he would disappear. Bumpy left the cafe, stepping into the hazy morning light of Harlem. The story closed, the only way possible in this city, with a phone call, a quiet meeting, and a decision made where minutes were never kept. But its meaning didn't fade. Cab Calloway was safe. Harlem was reminded it had someone guarding its boundaries, and the Genovese family was reminded that some things, even if not in their books, belonged to Harlem, and no one could cross them. Years later, long after the Cotton Club lights had gone dark, when Cab Calloway recordings played on radio as relics of a brilliant era, Cab still spoke of that night whenever asked about his most unforgettable performance moments. Not because of the punch, not the pain on his face, not the humiliation before hundreds. What Cab remembered was the moment he looked up and saw a figure standing between him and the man who wanted to finish him. "There are times in life," Cab said in a late 1960 interview, "when you know exactly who's really on your side." That night, I knew Bumpy wasn't standing there for fame, for rumors, for power. He stood for Harlem. Listeners might not fully grasp it, but anyone who lived in Harlem then knew Cab was right. Bumpy Johnson, despite his name always tied to complicated underworld tales, was the person Harlem saw as the final boundary between them and a cold city. But on Lenox Avenue corners, in small cafes, barber shops, sidewalk chats, Bumpy's name carried acknowledgement. He was the one who kept Harlem from being swallowed. Cab said there were nights he sat alone before his dressing room mirror, recalling Bumpy's eyes on the Cotton Club stage that night. No anger, no rush, no fear, Cab said. Just certainty. He knew what he would do, and he did it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Many years later, when those who once ran the Cotton Club vanished, when Italian Mafia families underwent major changes, when Harlem entered a different era, Bumpy's image remained unchanged in community memory. Not as a boss, not as underworld controller, but as a symbol of honor. In conversations across generations, people retold that story like an unedited legend, that one winter evening, in the room where black people were allowed to sing but not hold their heads high, Bumpy Johnson stepped onto the stage and forced the entire city to re-examine its boundaries. Some say, without that night, Cab Calloway might have continued being seen as mere entertainment, great talent, but still segregated like all black artists. But after that night, how people viewed Cab changed. They didn't just see the artist, they saw dignity. They saw Harlem stand up. They saw a community with a protector when the law wouldn't do it for them. To outsiders, the story might seem just a clash between two influential men, but to Harlem, it was affirmation. Their artists weren't decorations to raise or lower at whim. Bumpy never boasted about it. He didn't retell it, didn't mention it, didn't use it to threaten or show power. When someone brought up the Cotton Club, he stayed silent or changed the subject. But in that very silence, people saw his role even clearer. Bumpy didn't need newspaper credit. He was etched into Harlem people's memory, where real stories mattered more than tidy articles. In old age, Cab kept the habit of sitting by the window, listening to his old recordings. Whenever asked about the Cotton Club night, he only smiled lightly and said, "Back then, I thought I was alone. But Harlem people never leave any of us alone." Once Cab said something that silenced the whole room. There are people who only need to stand in the right place at the right time to change the entire story. Bumpy was that kind of person, and he wasn't exaggerating. Because from Harlem's perspective, that night wasn't just about Cab being hit. It was the night a boundary was rewritten. It was the night the Genovese family understood that no matter their power, Harlem had its own laws. It was the night the Cotton Club, symbol of segregation, witnessed black people protected, not by asking permission, but by one man's willingness to stand. That story, retold under dim bar lights or at family gatherings, always ended the same way. with the same sentence, as accurate as the event itself. In a city where white power could crush anyone that night, Bumpy Johnson said just 3 words: "Not in Harlem." If you want to hear more true stories about Harlem, power, and the people who made history, please subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Thank you for watching. See you in the next storytelling journey.